think is really important too, when people are considering transitioning to a plant-based diet, like I think what really bogs people down is not knowing where to start and having it seem like there is just so much to do here. I don't like, it's such a huge difference. If you say no meat, no dairy, no oil, no sugar, no salt, all organic, don't ever use your microwave, and people like, it's just overwhelming, right? And so like what I like to do is think about where do we stand and what's the most effective thing we can do. So there's this principle called the Pareto Principle, which is the 80-20 Pareto Principle. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of that, but it's kind of a thing in business, but it also applies to nutrition. And so like in business, they say that about 80% of your profits come from maybe 20% of your product lines. So clearly you'd want to focus on that 20%. Well, the same thing is true here. About 80% of the rapid change that you can have in your health comes from 20% of things that you do, okay? And what happens is in real life, what we end up doing, this is what I did before we were plant-based, is like I would agonize over getting grass-fed beef instead of corn-fed beef, and I would get organic milk instead of conventional RBST milk, and I would get like eat superfoods, like I have a microgreens business. People are like, oh, I'll put these broccoli sprouts on my cheeseburger. Well, okay. I mean, like it's probably not going to make that much difference in your health. It might taste good, but, focusing on supplements like powders, protein, like that's not going to transform your life. What will transform your life? Okay. This is what I haven't ever seen this anywhere. I just made this up, but this is like, as I've been thinking about this, like, what do people need to focus on? So this is Stephanie's list here, but step 1 and 2, and you could argue about like which is most important, but step 1 is just, if you can only do one thing, cut out meat and then replace it with legumes, beans, peas, and lentils. That will change your life, okay? If you just do that and nothing else, okay? But then, so like I saw Forks Over Knives about 8 years ago, and I love dairy, but I could care less about meat. And so, we all hear what we want to hear when we get new information. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, meat's bad. And so I never ate meat for breakfast or lunch again. And then like we'd probably have 2 or 3 meatless meals a week at home. But I just didn't want to hear the dairy part. So I kept eating my yogurt, which I loved every day. And, I have ice cream or whatever, like hear what you want to hear. Right. But when I finally gave up dairy, like when we went plant-based about 2 years ago and I cut out dairy, oh my gosh, my life just changed. Like weight just fell off of me because I was a purist. I only ate full fat dairy because I believe that in skim milk, they put oxidized powdered milk in, and that was bad for you. Well, what's even worse than oxidized powdered milk in your skim milk is the 30% saturated fat that's in the whole milk. So yeah, if you can go to the trouble to cut out dairy, your life will change. I mean, like it is huge. And so like just those 2 things made a huge, we reversed Paul's diabetes and didn't know to take him off of oil. Okay. And it was like, after that, I was like, oh, we're supposed to give up oil too. So anyway, I mean, like, great. He was just pre-diabetic, and it probably wouldn't have worked if his diabetes was worse than just being pre-diabetes. But anyway, so yeah, cut those 2 things out. Cause like, there's this Dr. Baxter Montgomery who I absolutely love, and he's a heart failure doctor that did research showing you can reverse end-stage heart failure with a plant-based diet. But he makes a little story about if you have a house, like if you drive home from church one day and your house is on fire, okay, but there's someone there spraying a hose of gasoline on your house, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to make the gasoline hose stop, right? That's got to stop to fix the problem. Before we can start putting out the fire, we've got to stop the conflagration, right? So that's what meat and dairy is like. That's like spraying gasoline on a house fire. Stop that first. But then we can't just stop the gasoline. We also need to heal the problem, right? We need to rebuild the house. So we need to add leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, fruits. These are all the phytonutrients and antioxidants that we're going to get that are going to repair like our healing rate and suppress cancer. Okay. And, you know, like kids hate vegetables. My kids generally hate vegetables, but most adults eat vegetables. Like people are happy to eat an extra salad, but you're going to put your balsamic vinaigrette on it, you know, like, so adults are in the habit. And like, we were just talking about this beforehand, people are happy to eat a salad. They just don't want to give up the stuff. So they're happy to pour water on the fire, but they don't want to stop spraying the gasoline, right? But you really have to do both to make any headway. Okay. So after you've cut out meat, added legumes, cut out dairy, and then you're probably already eating vegetables, okay? So, and you don't even have, I used to think that you would have to eat like 18 vegetable servings a day to be healthy. And of course, that does help. I mean, that's great. But you really just got to cut out the meat and add the legumes. I mean, and the dairy, that's the most important thing. And then keep eating vegetables. You'll probably eat more because you're not eating meat and dairy, which fills you up, right? And then you want to learn to really back down on the oil. That's the next thing that's really going to transform your life. If you have more severe chronic problems like coronary artery disease and diabetes, cutting out the oil will really start to cut away. Like, we're not going to just regulate your sugar. We're going to reverse your insulin resistance by melting the fat out of your cell walls that's causing the insulin resistance. Okay. So that's why we need to cut out oil. That's what we need to cut out oil to reverse coronary artery disease. Okay. So that makes a big difference. We also, at the same time we're cutting out oil, we want to phase out fake meat and fake dairy, like vegan junk food, okay? And vegan junk food, like vegan hot dogs or whatever, vegan meat, fake meats, Beyond Burgers, you know, that's fine to have, you know, every now and again. My husband loves that stuff. I hate it. But, you know, if you love it, then have it every now and again. But you don't want to say like, oh, my protein is, I'm going to have a Beyond Burger every day. No, Beyond Burgers were created to absolutely mimic the characters of meat, which is like 30% fat. Okay. So, and I think it's got coconut oil. You have to be really careful with these vegan substitutes because they will, coconut oil is delicious. And it is about 90% saturated fat. Butter is about, I think, 40 to 45% saturated fat. So you may switch to a vegan diet and be dismayed when your cholesterol level jumps 100 points because saturated fat will increase your cholesterol, okay? So we have to be really careful with that. So we want to save oil, especially coconut oil, for a rare treat. And like a lot of vegan ice creams are going to have coconut oil in them. Your almond ice cream is going to have coconut oil. Okay. So you got to be careful with that. So it's fine. Like as you're trying to wrap your head around transitioning, and like my husband had to do this. He had to have his like Italian sausage, fake vegan stuff, you know, and then he was like, okay, I think I can see my way forward if I know that this exists and I can have this sometimes. And then after we started eating more whole food, he just kind of forgot about his vegan sausage, but he still has it every now and again, but because he likes it and I hate it and I've never eaten it once. So anyway, but you want to work to phase that out. We, of course, want to get rid of soft drinks, and everyone knows you should get rid of soft drinks, even on a standard American diet. No one's ever said, oh, soft drinks are good for you. But really try to even get rid of your Diet Coke. You know, like that's always been a big hang up for me. I love Diet Coke. And get used to drinking herbal tea. I've got some right here now. But that's another good thing. Herbal tea is really good for you. And that just helps get your taste buds used to more natural food and off of that like fake sugary food that we're just addicted to. You just kind of have to break the addiction. And then we want to eliminate refined grains and really work on maximizing whole grains. Okay. You know, of course, like instead of white bread, have whole wheat. Instead of white rice, have brown rice. But also, and this is like kind of later on, maybe towards the end. Oh, actually, I have it down there on number 9. So I'm going out of order here. But once you get used to doing like whole wheat pasta and like whole wheat pita instead of the white version, whole, brown rice, stuff like that, and quinoa, try to work on, like, as we get better and better, another thing to work on is trying to move up what we call the whole grain hierarchy, okay? And if you're interested in learning more about that, just Google Brenda Davis, RD. She's a registered dietitian, and she has a video about the whole grain hierarchy. But basically, the best grains that we can eat are intact whole grains, which are just the way they grow out of the ground. So that's like rice. Brown rice is an intact whole grain. Quinoa, like spelt, bulgur wheat, all these whole grains. And those are really good for us because the bran and the fiber stays intact, and it makes it all the way through our intestines, okay? And that's how we improve our health so much, because we can pull excess hormones like estrogen and insulin like growth factor 1 and all sorts of toxins get eliminated from our body because we have a lot of fiber and a lot of bulk moving through our intestines, okay? And it's gonna pull that stuff out and just put it in the sewer system, right? That's where we want all that junk to get out of our bodies. So, so the thing we want to focus on by the time we get to that point is you don't want your whole grain every day to be like a slice of whole wheat toast or all pasta. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ever have bread or toast, or you can't ever have pasta, but try to really get some good intact whole grains, like oatmeal at breakfast. And then like at lunch, I always have hummus, and like I'll have a whole wheat pita, but then I really tried to work towards like, well, why don't I just put this on a bed of quinoa, because it's an intact whole grain, and this isn't like lunch is not like a party meal for me anyway. So like I just try to put it on whole grains, and because it's better for you, and it's going to help, it's going to help your gut too, and it's going to give you more fiber. Yeah, so we want to increase the wholeness, and the closer we can get our food to just growing out of the ground, the better. We want to also, I'm going to go back, let's see, number 7. Yeah, then try to get off your sugary desserts, okay? Now, sugar doesn't cause diabetes, right? Like sugar is kind of demonized in our society, and it's not good for you. I'm not going to say it's good for you, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say meat and dairy is worse, okay? So for your friends that are like, oh, I couldn't fathom going on a plant-based diet. Well, try to just have chili with beans instead of meat, just one time, okay? So start with that. And then after you've done these major things, then you can focus on stuff like, well, let's try to have fruit for dessert instead of, a cookie, okay? Even though you can get vegan cookies, right? For example, something I like to have, I love chocolate, like most women do, right? And I discovered this stuff called cacao nibs, which is you've heard of espresso beans that you can eat or something. This is like whole grain chocolate. It's just the cacao bean, and it's roasted or something. And so it's kind of like cocoa powder. It's not sweet at all, but it's just like a crunchy cacao nib. I don't know. So I eat that, and I put it with some dried tart cherries. And so you get the chocolatey taste, and then you get the sugar from your cherries. That's every day at lunch. That's what I have after lunch. So I won't want to eat like a piece of chocolate or something, right? Real chocolate. And it just tastes amazing. But you just try to find little tricks you can do to have a whole food dessert. You can make brownies out of beans, black bean brownies, that exists. You can sweeten your food with dates. So you can make a ton. And if you look on my Facebook, on my natural state, I have so many Facebook pages, natural state plant-based Facebook page. I think a lot of y'all are on it, but if you scroll through there, I have a bunch of these desserts, and I have the links on there too. I even have a recipe for chickpea cookie dough. You just make, it's like hummus, but you put a little bit of almond flour and maybe some maple syrup, and then some plant milk, and it gets the consistency of cookie dough. And then you can put like cacao nibs and it's like chocolate chip cookie dough. It's crazy. And it tastes so good. Oh, and dates, you sweeten it with dates. So dates are very sweet. I mean, like it tastes like fudge if you eat a date, like a medjool date. And it's actually a low glycemic index food. So even people that are trying to reverse their diabetes can eat dates. And anyway, you can make like, go to forksoverknives.com. There's amazing whole food plant-based recipes. So just because we're saying don't eat refined sugar doesn't mean you can't have awesome desserts, because you can make amazing things with dates and all these things that these plant-based chefs figure out that I never would have known you could do in a million years. Okay, and then on number 8, I have limit fatty plants. So once you just wrap your head around switching to, getting off the meat and dairy, eating legumes, figuring out the plant milk thing or whatever, then we can start to address, like, do you have underlying coronary artery disease? Do you have a cardiologist? That's a good way to determine, do you have coronary artery disease, right? Of course, if you've had a stent or bypass surgery, you do. But like, depending on your level of severity of coronary artery disease or diabetes, stuff like that, if you're not making progress in reversing your diabetes, decreasing your hemoglobin A1C, and you won't probably unless you back off of nuts and avocados, like fatty plants, okay? And this is, the whole nut thing is like an area of controversy among whole food plant-based physicians and thought leaders. But Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn has the most definitive research that we've ever seen. He's done many studies, but I think the most definitive study he did was in 2014. He got 177 patients that were heart patients, like they had existing heart disease. Some of them were like needed to have bypass surgery, or they weren't a candidate and they were turned down, like they had bad heart disease. He put them on a whole food plant-based, no oil diet, and his diet is no nuts, no avocados. Like I think you get like 1 olive a day and like no coconut, or certainly no refined coconut stuff. And by God, not a single one of them, well, only one out of 177 had a major cardiac event, meaning stroke, heart attack, or death in the next 3.7 years. And that's really unheard of. I mean, that's amazing for a heart patient. Like my patients are always having cardiac events, and so yeah, he has definitive research that if you do that, you will totally stabilize and eliminate your heart disease. Now, the study that's never been done that everyone wishes was done was, well, yeah, I get it, Dr. Esselstyn, but can we get away with avocados, or how many nuts can we get away with and maybe still not have too much death? And we just don't have that study, because his study was so definitive. Researchers are like, well, you can't improve on that. And you're like, well, I'm not trying to improve. I just want to see how much I can get away with. And they don't really design studies to see how many avocados we get away with. So we don't know. But yeah, generally, if you have bad disease, you want to cut out those fatty plants. And then at the very end there is agonize about organic food if you have room in your budget to do so, okay? Like you don't need to, like when you're coming off of like a standard American diet, think that you have to also convert everything to organic at the same time. Organic food is better, yes, but it's that 80-20 principle. I ate all organic dairy and grass-fed beef, and I was 20 pounds overweight, and my cholesterol was over 200. Like, it don't make any difference how perfectly raised your meat and dairy is. It's just the human body simply does not tolerate meat and dairy in the amounts that we have been told to eat them since childhood, okay? And you will predictably get sick from that amount. So yeah, so that's just basically the whole idea on just how to transition over. But yeah, and the crazy thing is that we are evolutionarily hardwired to fear deprivation, okay? And like all the women here, whenever you've had a newborn baby, I guess probably men too, like you are terrified, is that baby getting enough milk, right? Like if you're breastfeeding or you're formula feeding, and like, you know, like I would, you know, if you're breastfeeding, you can't measure how much is going in. So you're like trying to count the diapers and everything. And I remember like when my first child was born, he was a preemie, and I was just in agony because I had trouble breastfeeding him. And like, I just had this like visceral fear that he was going to like, just like become dehydrated and have to go back out and have a scalp vein in his head and blah. But so that's our natural thing, is to think like we are missing out on something. So that's why supplements are so popular. That's why protein powders are so popular, because we always think we need to take more extra stuff. Okay. But really what we need to do is eliminate stuff, because the main reason we die is from excess fat and from eating foods that, as it turns out, the human body just doesn't tolerate that well, which is animal protein. We can only tolerate a very small amount of animal protein before we start predictably getting sick. So yeah, so that's the other thing we think. Oh, and my other tip is, as you're working your way down here and you get towards the like, oh, now I'm getting off my sugary desserts and stuff, also be aware of that "but it's vegan" devil on your shoulder. That's the thing. I mean, I still fall for it too. And like, once you convert over, and it's funny, once you do convert over to a plant-based diet, like you tend to get this really hard wall of like, I'm not eating meat or dairy, you know, and like, you just won't do it, but you're always going to slide back to that "but it's vegan." Like you might snitch an Oreo, like, oh, it's vegan, you know? And yeah, I mean, like, you know, we all have our weaknesses and, you know, just indiscretions from time to time, but be aware, if you start doing the "but it's vegan" like 2 times a day, you're going to start slipping backwards and getting sick. So try to save your "but it's vegan" indiscretions for like when you are out of the house. That's what I try to do, is to try to draw a hard and fast line of what I bring into my house. And especially now, because we can't even hardly go anywhere. But, you know, it's hard to get perfect plant-based food when you're out. So if you ever have to deviate, like, well, do it when you have to eat out or when you have to go out anyway, when you can't control the situation. But be careful about bringing "but it's vegan" food into the house, because then you'll start that slippery slope. Okay.